Yo, what's good team? Welcome to today's CSS or Cascading Style Sheets tutorial where we're going to be doing some artwork. If you have no prior experience, that's excellent. You don't need any. The only prerequisite is that you know a little bit of HTML, and if you're unfamiliar, there's a link in the description for a little crash course for that too. If you like the video, please like and sub. Super appreciate it, and let's get into it. So in this tutorial today, we're just going to be making some pretty artwork. We've got a sky, an ocean, we've got some clouds, the sun rises over the horizon, we get some nice little water effects and some water splashes. So all in all, it just looks pretty, it's not too complicated. So now let's make you a CSS Pro. So to get started, the first thing we're going to do is cd into our directory that we are going to be making our folder. And so I'm just doing this in my terminal, and in here what we can do is type make directory, and we're just going to call it CSS Crash Course. As we're going to be drawing a picture, you could call it anything you like, and then we're just going to cd into that directory, CSS Crash Course. And now I'm just going to type code dot to open up my code editor where we're going to make the magic happen. So now that I have my code editor open for this project, we're going to need one file, and that's an index.html file. And in here, we're going to use the exclamation shorthand, and that's just going to give us our boilerplate code for our entire project going forward. So now the other thing you'll need for this tutorial is an extension called live server. And so I already have it installed here, and so you can install it. And the reason we're going to do that is so that we can open the project up with live server. And the cool thing about that is that now we're going to have a responsive page on the side, and so I could just come in here to the body and type James, and we can see that that shows up immediately in our document on the side. So we covered most of this in the previous tutorial, so this is all just the HTML, and we're not going to need a crazy amount of HTML for this project. All we're going to need is a div, and we're going to give this one an ID of sky. We're going to need the same, and this one is going to be called water, and then we're going to need one more, and that is going to be sun. So with these three things, we can get started on looking at how CSS works. So there's a couple of ways you can write CSS. You could open up an index.css, or in other words, a styles.css sheet, and you can import this into your document, but for this particular tutorial, we're just going to be using a style tag, which you can actually use directly in your HTML file inside of the head tags. So now within this style tag, there is a whole lot of excellent stuff that we can do. We're going to first open up and use the asterisk selector. So this selects every tag in our entire HTML document, and we use curly parentheses to open up like a styling space. And in here, almost as if it were an object, we can start typing out some styles. And so the first one is going to be margin 0, and this will be clear why in a second, and we'll actually just make that more obvious. So if I type James in there, we can see that currently we have some default styles applied, like a default padding and margin, and so we're just going to completely reset everything, giving it all a default padding of 0 and a margin of 0 and a box sizing border box. Now, box sizing border box isn't too important, but as an introduction to styles, margin is, if we use an analogy of a box, let's say you're sending 3 packages internationally and you package up each box with its like contents. The padding is, as you might expect, you know, the gap between the item. Let's say you're sending an egg and you have a whole lot of fluff around it to protect it from the wall of the box. The fluff is analogous of the padding, and the margin would be if you have 3 boxes, let's say they're separated by some foam or some space between them in the shipping container, that would be the margin, so the margin between containers. So if we save that, we can see that our document fits to the edge of our page, and we're now good with a totally blank slate that we can make some magic happen with. So the first thing we're going to do is learn how we can directly target tags. Now in CSS, the reason they call it cascading style sheets is because your styles will cascade across all elements that are relevant to a particular style that you write. So if I write body, that will apply styles to this body element. Now the first style we're going to be looking at is height, and so as you might expect, the height just sets the height. And so there's a lot of ways you can set dimensional styles and a lot of units, and so in this particular case I'm going to use one that is view height. So VH is short for view height. You could also use percentage, and that's just a percentage of the parent tag. You could use pixels, you could use EM, which is more of a text related font. There's a whole lot of stuff you can do, but in our case, we want it to occupy this entire height, so we can go view height. And the second one we could do is we could have, we could set a background color of green just for the sake of it. And so now we can see that our entire page turns green. Now that's not exactly what we want, but just to demonstrate, we could also set the color to white. And so that's going to change the color of all text elements. And that's just an example of how we can apply styles to this content down here. So in this particular case, all we're going to need is the body with a height of 100% of the view height. The next one we're going to look at is position relative. Now, position relative just basically says that, okay, this particular item fits in a natural order, or basically the order that the HTML is written. So one item might be relative to the next and so on and so forth. It's also the default positioning, but if you have children elements with different positions, it's good to specify this as the parent. The next one we're going to be doing is display of flex. So flex is just like essentially a method of organizing children content. And so in this particular case, I have 3 child elements to this parent tag. And so flex is just going to say, okay, we'll lay them out one next to each other. And it basically just coordinates them as if they were boxes adjacent. However, since the default is going to be horizontally, and we could actually see that by selecting the div, we could say background yellow. We can see that the divs, if I give them content, Henry and Lucy, each of them is stacked one after the other in a row. And so what we could do instead is say flex direction column. And so now that's going to arrange them. Instead of being horizontal, it's going to lay them out vertically, which is what we will need for our particular project. So here we can see that I've selected the div tag and it's applied that style to all of our divs. But the next one we're going to focus on is how we can select elements using the unique identifier. So only one ID will be Sky on this particular page. And we can do that using the hash or the pound. So I could say hash or pound, and that's going to select this element and style this element. And so in this particular case, I want to give it a height of 50 view height. So if the parent is 100 view height, suddenly James is going to occupy half of that view height. Now we're also going to need to give this a position of relative, and then we're going to apply the exact same thing to the water. And so I could say height, 50 view height, and position. But instead of repeating myself, I could actually duplicate that style and apply it to both of them, just like that. And so now each of them will occupy 50% of that space. So Lucy is unfortunately just sitting down there at the bottom, but we don't even need it there for a minute, and that is all good. So now that we have these two elements occupying their respective heights, and we've split them up for half for the sky and half for the sea, the next thing we can do is make them look pretty. And so we can add some more styles to our sky element. And in this case, we're going to add a background, which is a linear gradient. So instead of just a solid color, I can have a gradient, and I'm going to make this to bottom. So that's the direction of the linear gradient. I'm going to say medium orchid is the color, and we're going to go to a lavender. So if I save that, we can see that we get this nice purple sky color. I'll just close that over the side. And now I can do the exact same thing for the water and give that a background of a linear gradient to bottom of aquamarine to sky blue. And so just like that, we actually have a really cool looking little page, and we have learned how to use those kinds of selectors. Now we're going to get our first example of why this position is relative is so important, because in our sky, what I'm going to do is use what they call a pseudo element, and we have two of them. We have a before and we have an after. Now in this particular case, you would normally use an after if your pseudo effect, which is going to be placed, above your element if it was close to the finish, and before if it was close to the start. So ours is going to be close to the end. We can open that up, and we're going to use the second type of position, which is absolute. So a relative position places things logically and in the order that the HTML occurs, whereas an absolute position takes it out of context of the HTML, and it gives you the ability to place it wherever you want arbitrarily on top of the nearest parent container with a position of relative. And so in this particular case, this parent has a position of relative, but so does this parent, so it will be placed relative or above, anywhere above that we decide this parent here. And so in this particular case, I'm going to say that I want the bottom to be 0, so it's going to be hard up against the bottom, I want the width to be 100% of the parent element. I want the height to be 1 pixel. I want the background to be white. For pseudo elements, you have to set a content to an empty string. Equally, you could set it to a string, but in our case, I'm just going to go with an empty string. And so now when I do that, we get this slight white line down here that you can only just see if I zoom in. And the last thing we're going to do is apply a filter, and we're just going to say blur 2 pixels. And so what that's going to do is it's just going to blur that line on the horizon slightly, and so it just gives you a very slight glow. You know, you could make it more significant by making it 2 pixels, which I actually think I prefer. Create some perspective. So that's looking pretty cool. Now the next one we can select is the sun, once again using that ID ## selector. And for the sun, we're going to set a height and a width of 30 view min. So that's going to be 30% of the minimum viewport, and we're going to do the same for the width so that it's consistent. We're also going to give this a position of absolute, and since the nearest parent container is the body, that means that we can place it anywhere within that body element. So in this particular case, we're going to place it 50% from the left, and so if I save that, we can't see anything because we have to give it some background color. And in this particular case, we're going to go a linear gradient to bottom, and that's going to be gold and dark orange. So now we can see it show up there. This is one color combination that would work. The other one would be a yellow to a deep pink. So that's just going to give you a slightly more neon-y, glowy sunrise. We could actually just swap these around as well. So we could say yellow. Just like that. And now either one is, you know, it's whatever your preference is. And we're also going to give it a border radius of 50%. And so that's going to make it perfectly circular. And so now we have our sun rising into the sky. So now we notice that we set this left position to 50% of the page, and it's placed it off center of that. But if you actually look, it's actually just lined up this left side to 50% of the page. And so what we have to do is translate this element back 50% of its width. And we can do that using a transform translate x of minus 50%. And now it's smack bang in the middle of the page. Now the last thing we're going to do for this particular element is apply a Z index. And so a Z index is just for content layering and deciding which one sits above and which one sits below. And in this particular case, we're going to go with a 20 because we want to set the water to have a Z index of 30 and the sky to have a Z index of 10. And the reason we do that is because we want the sun to sit on top of the sky, but we want it to sit behind the water. And so now we get to the fun part where we can provide an animation. We can name the animation, so I'm going to call it rise. We can set a duration of 10 seconds. We can say ease in out, and this is just kind of like the timing and the speed. And we can say infinite so that it's on an infinite loop. And now we can define this animation by using the @ symbol and then keyframes, giving the name of the animation, and providing different percentage points throughout the animation, so throughout the 10 seconds. So for the first one, we want the bottom to be smack bang 0, and so if I do that, that's going to place it way down here behind the C. And now if I do 100% and say bottom 130 view height, what's going to happen is our sun is going to rise from behind and go up off the page by 130% of the view height. Now obviously that's not all we want to do. We also want to add some box shadow, so that's just adding some shadows to the box to give some more perspective. And in this particular case, we're going to say an X offset of 0, a Y offset of 0, a spread of 25 pixels, and a blur of 14 pixels, and we're going to say orange. And so now we'll see maybe the slight, yep, there's our little shadow as it rises into the sky. Now at 50%, we're going to want something different. And then what we're going to do is at the top, we're going to change that to a white. So as it rises into the sky, we get an orange box shadow as it comes over the horizon, and it becomes whiter as we go up into the sky. Now I think that that's going to work better if we stick to the original colors, so I'm going to go dark orange. So now when it comes over the horizon, it's really going to look like it's burning. There's our sun into the sky and it goes up. So that looks super cool. Now, obviously I don't want Henry and James there, so I'm going to remove them for the second. And now we can start moving on to the next feature, which is going to be super cool, and that is the water on the sunrise. So this particular element is going to be a div within of our water div, and this is going to have a class of water sunrise. Now classes do not have to be unique, and we can give multiple of them. I could say second class here if you wanted to have more than one class to a particular div. And we can select classes using the period key and just say water sunrise. And now what I can do is start adding some styles in here. And so in this particular case, we're going to have a position of absolute. So once again, we're going to take it out of context, and it's just going to be able to be placed anywhere with respect to our particular parents. And so obviously, since it has no context as to where to be placed, it's not just in the logical HTML order. We have to give it some top, left, bottom, right. And so we're going to go top 0, left 0, bottom. Actually, no, we're not going to specify a bottom. Instead, we're going to go for a height and width. And so our width is going to be 200%, so twice the width of the parent. And the height is going to be 100%. And in this particular case, what we're going to do is give it a different background of a radial gradient. And this is going to be circle at, so we're just specifying where the radial gradient starts. It's going to be 50% horizontally and minus 30% vertically. We're going to go HSL to 100%, 65%. So that's hue, saturation, and lighting. It's just another color specification. And we want to have the gradient go out to a transparent. So now if I save that, we can see that that pops up just here like that. Now obviously that isn't centered in our page, and so what we're going to have to do is just say transform translate x minus 25%, and that's going to pull it back so it's smack bang in the middle of the page, just like that. Now obviously that looks kind of whack, but we can apply some overlay effects by just saying mix blend mode color burn, and so instead of just having this color, what it's going to do is burn it onto the background color. And so now we'll see that when the sun rises, we get a slightly more intense effect coming over the horizon, except it's not doing that because it's not actually dependent on the sun. What we have to do is once again provide an animation, and so this one's going to be called sunrise. Give it the same 10 seconds so that it matches the sunrise. We're going to go ease in, out, just like the sun, and we're also going to specify that as an infinite loop. And then once again, we're just going to go keyframes, sunrise, open that up, keyframes. And in here, what we're going to do is say 0% is going to have an opacity of 0, so it's going to be completely transparent. At 50%, we're going to have an opacity of 1, because that's when the sun comes over the horizon, so the blending on the water is going to be most significant. And at 100%, we're going to go back to having an opacity of 0, so that it's completely transparent again. So now we get that original watercolor. As the sun rises, we get that slight burn onto the water, and the sun rises off into the sky. Excellent. So now we have an excellent looking sunrise. The next thing we're going to do is add some water droplets. And so in here, what we're going to do is make another div with a class of water circle. And in this particular case, I'm going to say circle 1. And then I'm going to duplicate that a couple of times, and then here I'm going to say circle 2 and circle 3. So now we have a few different classes, but actually no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to show a different way to select them instead, so that is fine. So now what we can do is select those water circles. So here we have water circle. Now these water circles are also going to be placed absolutely over our parent element. And so for them, we're also going to have to specify a height, which is going to be 8% of the view minimum, so the minimum viewpoint, and a width of 5 view min, and that's just going to create some perspective for them. We're also going to give them a border radius of 50% so that they are totally a circle, and we're going to give them a border of 1 pixel thick. It's a solid line, and it's going to be white. So now we can see them come up here, and we can also note that I've actually got the height and the width around the wrong way. So we can just exchange them like that. And so now we have this kind of perspective-y circle off there in the distance. Now what we're going to do is set the default opacity to 0 so that they're initially invisible. However, we will revisit that in a second. So the next thing we're going to do is give this water circle an animation. So we're going to say animation, and we're going to call it splash because it's going to be a splash animation, and we're going to have it on a 9-second loop, and it's going to be infinite, so it's going to infinitely happen. So now we can define splash just like that. Oops, that's meant to be at keyframes. Splash, and we can say 0% is nothing, 50% is the same as 100%, so we can do that like that. And in this particular case, we're going to give them an opacity of 0 and a transform scale 1. Now, that's actually a mistake there because it's going to initially start off with an opacity and scale to 1. And what we're instead going to do is provide a transform here, and we're initially going to scale this down so it's 0, so that's going to have 0 size. And so now what we can see is it starts off with 0 size and it grows and then it fades out. You throw the thing and it splashes. So that is very cute. So to select the individual water circles, there's actually a number of ways that we can do it. And what we're going to do is use a slightly different selector. So we're going to select a div within the water hash that has the nth child. Well, actually for this one we're going to do first child, and we're going to select it like that. Now I'm going to duplicate that. This one is going to be last child because it's the last child. And this one we're going to do nth child, which takes the number of the child. So in this particular case, we want it to be the third. And now this one actually isn't going to work because it's going to target the sunrise. So instead what I can do is also change that to an nth child and make that 2. So now that we're targeting all of these particular elements, we can place them onto our screen. And so for the first one, I could say a top of maybe like 24% and a left of, that needs to be that, a left of 36%. For the second one, I could say top of maybe 53% and a left of 90%. And for the last one, I could say a top of maybe 66% and a left of maybe 40%. And so now if we look at those, just adding here, we should see 3 different splashes come up simultaneously. So we actually do, which is cool. They all pop up together, so that's neat. We'll watch it again. Magic, we get those little splashes. Now if you wanted to make them slightly more severe, what you could do is add a 1.5 pixels. So now they splash, they're a bit more visible. I might just change this top one to have a slightly smaller left of maybe 16%, so now it pops up over here somewhere. Those are our 3 splashes. And now what we're going to want to do is add some special effects to our pseudo effects, is add some special effects to our water circles by basically duplicating them. And so we can do that by saying dot water circle and using a before selector, and we can do the same thing with dot water circle after selector. And now we can say position absolute. Since it's a pseudo selector, we have to provide a content of hash. We can say an inset of 0. So that's just going to completely match the top, left, right, and bottom of the parent. We can once again say a border of 1.5 pixels solid white. We can say animation is also splash 9 seconds infinite. And we can say transform scale 0. So it's exactly the same as the parent, and we won't immediately be able to see it. But what we could do is we could say animation delay of 3 seconds. And so what's going to happen now is that that top one is going to go, and then the second one will go. So now the one issue with this is that's what's going to happen is we want to actually duplicate this effect multiple times with inside pieces. And so instead what we're going to have to do is give them multiple styles. And so for this one we're just going to say circle 1, and so circle 2 and circle 3. And we can instead just change this so that that's what it is here. So we can have circle 1, this can be circle 2, and this can be circle 3. Now the reason we're doing that is because we're actually going to have to duplicate these twice over. And so each of these is going to be like an inside effect for its parent. So we're going to call this water circle -1, water circle -2, water circle -3, and then this is going to be repeated again, 2 and 3, just like that. So now what's going to happen is that this water circle is going to have 2 replicas, this water circle is going to have 2 replicas, and so on and so forth, and they'll all be placed the same. So now if I do that, currently these ones aren't going to show up, so I'm just going to have to make sure that they have the same style, and we can do that by adding that in here. So we can say water circle 1, comma, enter that down. We can duplicate this line twice more, so we can say 2 and 3. Have to remove that little comma there. So now they're all going to come up together. We can't actually see them, but what we can do is specify animation delays. And so the way that that's going to work is we can say water circle is going to have an animation delay of 1 second. We can say water circle 1 has an animation delay of 2 seconds, and we can say water circle 2 has an animation delay of, so actually that's my mistake, that should be 4, 5, and 6 instead. So this, how this is going to work is 1 and 2 are going to be the animation delays for this first one. So just like that, and so they should actually have circle 1 and 1. This should be 2 and 2, and this should be 3 and 3. And then what's going to happen is that if we look at this first one, we get that triple water effect just like that. I don't know if you could quite see that. 1, 2, 3, although that's probably a bit too slow. So what we could do is maybe make them like 0.5 apart. So this is going to be 1.5 and this will be 2.5. So now if I save that, we get the first one, second one, third one. Except now the only other thing is that we're going to have to come in and add in all of these here. So we'll have to just duplicate this line a couple more times. 4, 5, 6. So we'll swap that for a comma, that for a 4, comma, that for a 5, comma, and then this one's lucky number 6. So does that look correct? 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's why it's a bit weird, because that should just be 2. So let's try that. Make that 2. Now I notice that I also don't have the class selectors in front of these, which is pretty severe. So now we're getting these slightly better splashes. Let's just see what this one looked like again. I mean, honestly, that's pretty good. Cute little splash animation effect. We can come back and refine that a bit later, but anyway, that's the splash is done. Now, the next thing that we're going to want is some clouds. So the clouds are slightly complicated, and they're going to be elements from within the sky. So we're going to have a div here, and we're going to give it a class of cloud, just like that. And so now what we can do is come into our thing and select that, give it a position of absolute, as we always do. We're going to go for a width of 60% of the minimum viewport, and a height of 6 view min. We're going to go for a background of hue, saturation, lighting, A for opacity somehow. It's going to be 150, 10% saturation, 75% lighting, and 0.8% opacity. We're going to say top of 15 view min left of 20 view min. We're going to say a border radius of 50%. We're going to go for a box shadow of 30% view min, 0.5 view min, 0 minus 1 v min. And we're actually going to use a thing called current color, which reminds me that we're going to change the color here to be that. And so this is just a term that allows you to actually pull the current color. So instead of writing that, I could just use current color, and it's going to use that current color. And we're going to add a secondary shadow, which is going to be minus 25 vmin, 0, 0, minus 0.6 vmin, and also that's going to be current color. So now we can kind of see that ugly sucker of a cloud in the sky. We're also going to come in here and give it an opacity of 0.2, so it's much harder to see, and I notice that that needs to be a vmin. So now we can see that we get the proper cloud in there just like that, which is kind of neat. And this is going to have some transforms. So we're going to have a transform. This is going to be a translate x of minus 150 vmin. And we're going to give it an animation of, oh, that's not what I wanted, animation of, we're just going to say clouds. It's going to be 120 seconds and infinite. And we're going to give it an animation delay of 10 seconds. That's actually going to be minus 10 seconds, so it starts a bit earlier. And finally, a filter of blur, just 1 pixel blur on top of that. And so now we can add that keyframe, keyframes, clouds, open that up. And in here, we're just going to say at 50%, we want to transform translate x to be 0 so that it's at its original position. And then we're going to say at 100%, we want the transform translate x to be 150% of the minimum viewport. So now it's going to come across our screen. We can see it sneaking into our screen there. If you wanted, you could up its opacity to 0.3, just like that. And what we're also going to do to add to that is actually just have another cloud, except this one's going to be called cloud 1. And we're going to just give it some slightly different dimensions. So it's going to have a left of 60% of the view min, a top of 5 view min, opacity is also going to be the same, so 0.3. Actually, I think I prefer 0.2. I honestly think that looks better. We're going to say a filter blur 1 pixel, just like the other one. An animation delay of 0, and an animation duration of 100 seconds. So this is just going to overwrite properties from the original one. So now we have this cloud come in slightly higher, and then we should get the second one coming in any second. And of course it's not, because I'm a Muppet and that needs to be cloud 1. So if I refresh that, we get one cloud coming in, and then there's the second cloud coming across the sky. Cool, so that's our 2 clouds. Now the next thing we want is, as the sun rises, we want some little water animations just coming across here. And so we can achieve that pretty easily by adding some extra divs. So we're going to say div, and this one is going to have a class of light. And we're going to have 8 of them. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now for the rest of them, we're going to have light 1. And so I'm actually just going to select all of them like that. Go space, light, dash. Here's going to be 2, here's 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and 8. So I think I have 1 too many, so I can just remove that. And now what these are going to be for are creating a light reflection on the water, and so we can come in here and target them. As you might expect, we're going to have a position of absolute, so they're going to be absolutely positioned on the container. We're going to have a height of 0.5 view min. We're going to have a width of 20 v min. They're going to have a background of white, background color of white. We're going to give them a left of 0, a right of 0, a margin auto, so that's going to place them centrally. So it's going to be an equal margin on either side, so it will just put it in the center. And so for the minute, we can actually see that come up perfectly smack bang in the center, which is just what we want. Now the next thing we're going to do is say a top of 1 view min. We're going to give it an initial opacity of 0, so it's originally invisible. It's going to have a border radius of 50%, so that's just going to make it curvy at either end. And then we're going to give it a filter of just a slight blur of 1 pixel, an animation of light 20 seconds infinite. It's going to have an animation delay. We're going to have to calculate this shortly to match it to the sun, but I think 5 seconds should be adequate for the start, just to guess. And I actually made a mistake. The border radius should not be 50%. It should be 25% of the view height, because we set this based on the view height. And in here we just want to add ease in out. And finally, we're going to have a transform scale x to 0.1, so it's tiny, and that should just about do that. So now the next thing we're going to have to do is do that keyframe. So at keyframes light, open that up, and we're going to start off with the 5%. And so in here we're going to have an opacity of 1, and we're going to transform scale x. Did I use a scale x? I did, of just 1. So it's going to make its maximum size here. So the next one is going to be 10%. We're going to have an opacity of 0.6. We're going to have a transform of scale x1. And we're also going to translate x 5%. So that's going to move it slightly to one side. Then we're going to have 15%. We're going to say opacity 0.6 once again. We're going to have a transform of scale x1. Translate x minus 5%, so that's going to move it back over to the other side. Then we're going to go 20%, opacity is going to be 0, so it's going to be completely transparent. We're going to have transform scale x back down to 0.1, translate x 0, and so I think actually up here we need to have a translate x 0 to set the original state, and that should just about do it. So now what we should see is we should see it come up just there like that, and it moves slightly back and forth. However, that is far too thick, so the height is going to be 0.2, I think. Let's try that. Comes over the horizon. That's not too bad for the minute. Honestly, we could even go view min 1. It's obviously very delayed and we haven't got the timing right, but we can fix that momentarily. And now what we're going to have to do is target the rest of the lights. So we're going to say .light1. We're going to set a new top, which is going to be 2 vmin, an animation delay of, I guess this one should probably, let's try 4.5 seconds. And then we're going to replicate this down a whole bunch of times for each of them. So this is going to be 2. This is going to be 3, and we're going to add 0.5 onto here, so that's going to be 5 seconds. This one's going to be 4. Viewmin is going to be 4. 3, 4, and 5.5. This is going to be 4. This will be 5. This will be 6. Here we'll have 5. I think we might have to come back and change these soon, but that's alright. It's going to be 6.5. This one's going to be 6, 7. This is just going to be 7. And then here we can have 8. This is going to be 7.5, and this is going to be 8. So that should actually be 7. So let's just try that. So now when we do it, sun's going to rise. We're going to get some spunky little light animations come up. They're not very bright, unfortunately. So I think I must have, let's just try increasing the height back to 0.5. There's 1, then they all come out way too late. So the other thing I forgot to do is we actually have to start changing the widths. So our original width is 20 vmin. What we want is to start changing the width down. So this is going to be 18 vmin. This is going to be 16. Width is 16 vmin. Actually, no, we'll keep this one to 18. We'll make this one width is 16 vmin. Then we'll come down to a 14 vmin. And then we'll have a width of, did I say 14? Yeah, we'll do 10 vmin, and then lastly an 8 vmin. 8 vmin, just like that. So let's see if that works. The sun comes up, the timing is not good, but you can see like it just gets a bit smaller as you kind of come out. And actually I don't mind the width, but what we're going to have to do is just change this delay. So the original one, let's try making that 3. We just want to make sure that that first one pops up properly. So there's the first one, so it actually needs to, let's try 2. You could maybe go 2.5. Let's try 2.5. Yeah, that's not too bad. Okay, so what we're going to do is start off with 2.5. This one can be 3. We can have 3.5. This one can be 4, 4.5, 5, 5.5, and 6. Let's try that. Okay, so now the sun rises. We get this little animation here that's just the sun rising like that, which is super cute. Looks really neat. It lasts maybe a bit long, so what I might almost be inclined to do is just change the sun, wherever it is, to a 20 second, but what we'll also have to do is change the sunrise. So now let's do that. However, now it's way too early, so we're going to have to come back and edit these again, unfortunately. So what I might just do is try changing that to 5, 5, 6, 6, 7, 7, and 8. And so the first one should be 4.5. Let's see if that works. Cross your fingers. Sun rises. Oh, it's so close, isn't it? I think that should just be 5, which means we're going to have to make that 0.5. This is going to be 6.5, 7.5, 8, and 8.5. Last try. Let's give this a shot. We'll see if it works. Sun rises over our horizon. We get that nice little water effect just like that. We've got our little splashes occurring. You could add some animation delays to those. We've got the clouds in the background, and honestly, that's pretty much it. It's a nice little animation. I guess the last thing we'll do is just a little bit of text. And so what you can do is inside of your sun element, we're just going to have an h2 tag that says hire me. So now what's going to happen is when our sun comes up, I don't know if we'll be able to see that, our sunrise. Now you can see that that looks absolutely atrocious, and so what we're going to do is come in here inside of our style tag and select our sun, and we can sub-select the H2, and we're also just going to have to come all the way up to our sun and just say display grid, place items center. So now that's just going to directly center that content within that element. So it's perfectly centered, and now we can come down here and style our text. So for the text, we're going to have a font family of, let's just try sans serif. Anything's going to look better than what we currently have. Yes, I mean that's acceptable. We're going to change the color to white. We're going to have a text shadow of 004 pixels white, so it burns into the background. We can say font size is equal to 2 rem if you want it to be really large. We could say font weight is 6, you could do 800 if you wanted it to be really bold. So now we have some bold text rising over our horizon, just like that. Looks excellent. Super cool. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it, folks. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Make some pretty little artwork with some CSS styles. If you got to the end of it, you probably feel a bit better with CSS than you did when you started. So yeah, if you enjoyed, like and sub, super appreciated. Catch you guys later. Peace.